The rain had been falling since late afternoon, the kind that soaked through jackets and patients alike, turning the city streets into slick ribbons of reflected light. Daniel Reyes stood beneath the flickering awning of the office building, shoulders tight, checking the time on his cracked phone for the third time in a minute. It was nearly midnight. Again. He exhaled slowly, the breath fogging the cold air, and reminded himself not to be angry. Anger cost energy, and energy was something he never had enough of anymore. Inside the building behind him, laughter echoed, sharp, careless, and drunk. He recognized the voice instantly. Margaret Hale, his boss. Daniel rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the grit of exhaustion beneath his fingers. He'd been up since 5 that morning, packing lunches, braiding his daughter's hair with clumsy fingers, and promising her, again, that he'd be home early tonight. A promise he already knew he'd broken. The glass doors swung open, spilling warm light and noise onto the sidewalk. Margaret stumbled out, heels dangling from her fingers, her expensive coat half buttoned and her mascara smudged just enough to suggest she'd stopped caring hours ago. "Danny," she called, spotting him. "You waited." He forced a smile. "You asked me to." She laughed, waving him off. "Of course I did. You're dependable. That's your whole thing. Dependable." The word landed heavier than she intended. It always did. Margaret swayed slightly as she stepped closer, the sharp scent of alcohol mixing with her floral perfume. Daniel instinctively reached out, steadying her before she could stumble off the curb. "Careful," he said quietly. She looked up at him then, really looked at him, her blue eyes unfocused but searching. For a brief second, something like vulnerability crossed her face before it vanished behind a crooked grin. "You're a lifesaver," she murmured. "I couldn't drive like this. HR would kill me. Or worse, my ex would find out." Daniel nodded, saying nothing. He'd heard variations of this before. He guided her to his old sedan, opening the passenger door and making sure she was seated safely before walking around to the driver's side. The car smelled faintly of fast food and laundry detergent. A child's booster seat was strapped into the back, decorated with a pink unicorn sticker peeling at the edges. Margaret noticed it as Daniel started the engine. "You have a kid," she said, as if the realization had just struck her. "My daughter," he replied. "Sophia. She's 7. Margaret hummed, leaning her head back against the seat. 7. That's old enough to remember things." He glanced at her briefly. "Yes. It is." The drive was quiet at first, rain tapping steadily against the windshield. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel, his mind already racing through the logistics of tomorrow morning. Breakfast. School drop-off. Another long day at work. "Do you ever get tired?" Margaret asked suddenly. He almost laughed. "Yes. No, I mean," she turned her head toward him, squinting. "Tired of being good." Daniel didn't answer right away. The question lingered in the small space between them. "I don't think of it like that," he finally said. "I just do what needs to be done." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she snorted softly. "God, you sound like my father." Daniel felt a flicker of discomfort. "Is that bad?" She shook her head slowly. "No, just rare." They pulled up in front of her building, a sleek high-rise with a doorman who pretended not to notice the late-night arrivals. Daniel parked and got out, moving to open her door. She took his arm as she stepped out, leaning into him more than necessary. He stiffened slightly but said nothing. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. "Really? You're welcome," he replied. "Get some rest." She paused before entering the building, turning back to him. "You know, Daniel, people like you always end up paying the highest price." He frowned. "For what?" "For everyone else's mistakes." Before he could respond, she turned and disappeared inside, leaving him standing in the rain with a strange weight in his chest. The next morning came too quickly. Daniel woke before his alarm, the familiar knot of anxiety already tightening in his stomach. He lay still for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside their small apartment. Then he heard it, the quiet shuffle of feet, followed by a small cough. "Daddy." He sat up instantly. "I'm awake, baby." Sophia stood in the doorway, her hair a tangled halo around her face, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. She padded over and climbed into bed beside him, curling against his side. "You said you'd be home early," she mumbled. He swallowed. "I know. I'm sorry." She didn't answer, just sighed and pressed her face into his shirt. Daniel wrapped an arm around her, guilt blooming sharp and familiar in his chest. After breakfast and school drop-off, Daniel arrived at work 10 minutes early, as usual. He powered on his computer, reviewing emails and spreadsheets, losing himself in routine. It was easier that way. At exactly 9:30, his inbox pinged. Subject: My office. Now. He frowned. Margaret was already there when he knocked, seated behind her desk with a cup of coffee untouched beside her. She looked different, composed, sharp, sober. Close the door, she said. Daniel did, his pulse quickening. Is something wrong? She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Daniel, she said slowly, what I'm about to say, I've never said to anyone. He waited. I remember everything from last night. He nodded. I assumed you might. She exhaled. I also remember what I said to you. And what I didn't say. His brow furrowed. Okay. She stood up, walked around the desk, and stopped a few feet in front of him. I looked you up after you left, she said. Your file. Your history here. You've been passed over for promotion 3 times. He stiffened. I wasn't aware. You weren't supposed to be, she interrupted. You take extra shifts. You stay late. You never complain. And you drive your drunk boss home in the rain without asking for anything in return. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I didn't do it for. I know, she said. That's the problem. She met his eyes, her voice suddenly tight with emotion. I said people like you pay the highest price. I was wrong. He opened his mouth to speak, but she raised a hand. What I'm about to tell you, she continued, is going to change your life. And mine. Daniel felt his breath catch. Sit down, she said softly. Because once I say this, nothing goes back to the way it was. Daniel remained standing for a second longer than he should have. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls had quietly leaned in. He finally sat, folding his hands together to keep them from shaking. Margaret, no, Claire, he reminded himself she'd told him once to call her Claire when no one else was around, returned to her chair, but she didn't sit immediately. She stared out the window instead, watching the city wake up below. I wasn't always like this, she said suddenly, her voice low. The late nights, the drinking, the pretending I'm fine. Daniel said nothing. He had learned long ago that people didn't need fixing, they needed space to tell the truth. I built this company with my ex-husband, she continued. Everyone thinks he walked away because he wanted freedom. That's the story I let circulate. The real reason is uglier. She finally turned to face him. Her eyes were sharp, but wet. He walked away because I couldn't have children. Daniel's chest tightened. I tried, she said. For years. Doctors. Treatments. Hope followed by disappointment, over and over again. Eventually he stopped looking at me the same way. And I stopped recognizing myself. She laughed bitterly. So I worked. I climbed. I made myself indispensable. And somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be human. Daniel shifted in his chair. I'm sorry, he said quietly. She nodded, as if she'd expected nothing more. Last night, when you talked about your daughter, the way you said her name, it reminded me of something I lost before I ever had it. She took a steadying breath. That's why I looked at your file this morning. And that's why I realized something that made me feel sick. Daniel frowned. What? You've been invisible, she said. Not because you lack talent. But because people like me let ourselves believe that quiet strength doesn't need reward. She slid a folder across the desk toward him. His name was on it. Open it, she said. He hesitated, then did. Inside were performance reviews, internal emails, recommendation notes, things he had never been meant to see. Praise he'd never heard, arguments on his behalf that had gone nowhere. And at the back, a document that made his breath stop. A promotion letter. Senior Operations Manager. His vision blurred. This has to be a mistake. It's not, Claire said. It's overdue. Daniel shook his head slowly. I don't understand. Why now? Because last night, she said, her voice breaking just slightly, someone showed me what responsibility actually looks like. He closed the folder, hands trembling. I drove you home, he said. That's all. No, she replied. You chose to care when it cost you something. Silence settled between them, thick and fragile. There's more, she said. His heart sank. More. She nodded. I'm restructuring the department. I need someone I can trust, not just with numbers, but with people. Someone who knows what it means to carry weight and not drop it. She leaned forward. I want you to take the role. Full salary, flexible hours, remote options when needed, and benefits that actually support a family. Daniel's throat closed. My daughter will never wonder why her father isn't there, Claire said gently. Not because of this job. He stared at her, words failing him completely. For years, he had prepared himself for disappointment, trained his heart not to hope too loudly. Now hope stood in front of him, asking him to accept it. I don't know what to say, he whispered. Claire smiled sadly. Say yes. He did. The changes didn't happen overnight. Titles were announced. Desks moved. Whispers followed him through the halls. Some congratulatory, some suspicious. Daniel felt all of it, but he kept his head down, working harder than ever, not out of fear now, but gratitude. At home, things shifted too. Sophia noticed first. You're home, she said one evening, eyes wide with surprise as he walked through the door before sunset. He knelt and opened his arms. I told you I'd try harder. She hugged him fiercely. You promised. I know, he said. And this time, I can keep it. Weeks passed. Claire stopped drinking at work events. She delegated more. She listened. Sometimes, late in the evenings, she would stop by Daniel's office and ask about Sophia, how school was going, what she liked to read, whether she still slept with the rabbit. You'd be a good mother, Daniel told her once, surprised by his own honesty. Claire smiled, tears shining in her eyes. Thank you. One morning, as Daniel prepared a presentation for the board, Claire paused at his door. You know, she said, what you did that night didn't just change your life. He looked up. What do you mean? She met his gaze, steady and sincere. It reminded me that leadership isn't about control. It's about care. And sometimes, it only takes one quiet act of decency to wake someone up. Daniel leaned back in his chair, thinking of the rain, the keys in his hand, the choice he'd almost walked away from. He had driven his drunk boss home, expecting nothing. What she said the next morning hadn't just left him speechless. It had given him his life back.